I'm Katie Anderson, and I'm going to be presenting specifically on Korean women in Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism is kind of where I'm focusing mostly. Not listening. Okay, here we go. So specifically for women in Confucianism, early Confucianism is not as strict and repressive as it becomes later on. So they have actually a few women scholars. I didn't get their names, I couldn't find any of them, but they mentioned that there was such thing as women scholars within early Confucianism. A few, not very many, but they did allow it. They had rights. We learned this in class. They had a lot of rights. They had property rights. They could get education. There's some mention within some of the texts that some women were even considered kind of counselors to upper aristocrats, sometimes even the king, though they were not actually lumped in with counselors or advisors. They were just kind of women that had good ideas. But they were still allowed to talk to women to give their ideas, which is rather interesting. There's a focus of the noble man within Confucianism, which is pretty much the ideal that the elite in Confucianism want to get. It's focusing on learning from the 5 classics and trying to gain enlightenment. And in early Confucianism, there's even kind of, not necessarily mentioned, but it seems like women were encouraged to kind of seek for this enlightenment as well. So they've got the same types of goals, they're kind of pushing towards the same type of end, and that's actually very interesting for early Confucianism. As far as filial piety goes, it's more male-focused in how they still do things, but they had women within being able to be a bit more visible within the rites and things like that. So talking about women, you've got to kind of have to go over the 5 relationships within Confucianism. So you have ruler-subject, parent-child, husband-wife, elder sibling, younger sibling, and then friend-to-friend. So within Confucianism, there's always a focus on how you relate to the other person and where you are within them, because they have this hierarchy that you have to kind of always be thinking about, and the husband-wife relationship is really the only one they mention and they focus on women in usually, but that kind of goes in with Neo-Confucianism. So women kind of recede into the background of it. They're no longer active participants in society. You don't really see as much mention of them within texts and mentions of things going on in this society at the time. And their main role was to bear some. The noble man became just the noble man. That's all they focused on. They don't really ever mention that women can have these same goals. They don't really focus on that anymore. It's completely gone. And then the filial piety practices are refocused to the male sphere only. Now, women would prepare items for the rites, but usually it's very much in the background. They don't even mention it, and honestly, that could even be done by a servant. So they're not really even on par or even above servants at that point. So the ideal Confucian home, which is what the women's sphere would have encapsulated, has certain elements to it. Women are expected to demonstrate obedience before all other virtues, and this obedience directly reflects into their relationships with men. So you have pretty much no time in a woman's life when she is not subservient or thinking about her obedience towards a man. When she's young, a girl, she has to be subservient and be thinking about what she's doing to her father, or for her father. Wives to her husbands, and then eventually, when they become widows, because they all assume that their husbands are going to die first, when they're widows, they have to be subservient to their adult sons. So the woman still had kind of, not exactly ruling over the home, because the man still ruled over the home, but she was the one who was nurturing, she was the one teaching. And it was her job to kind of make sure that her home reflected kind of a microcosm of how the state was run. So you still have the focus on education, the the different relationships. She's instilling that home from very early on. So there's a even though there's a focus of them receding back, Confucianism also has this idea that women are the yin and men are the yang. So without them, it doesn't work. Even though they want to hide them in the background, they're still like a key component to for it working. the great goal of Confucianism is social harmony. And this, again, relates back to the private relationships and knowing your place. This applies especially to women as they cannot step out of their realm, they cannot push into the man's realm, because then this would create disharmony, and that would eventually lead into the state. Again, social relations begin at home, so she's teaching the children how to respect and who to respect, and things like that. There's also a focus on what is called Ren, which basic translation translates to reciprocity. Can't say that. And then this phrase pretty much encapsulates it from what Confucius says is, do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you, which was a really hard phrase for me to get because what we usually say is a little bit different. But Confucius for you. So, just to kind of give you guys an idea of the overall mindset that most people had towards women and what shows up in the texts about how we have to think about women, or they had to think about women, here's some sayings that I found rather entertaining. Okay, women's greatest duty is to produce a son. Pretty straightforward. A woman ruler is like a hen crowing. We should not be too familiar with the lower orders or with women. Those who cannot be taught cannot be instructed. These are women and eunuchs. Women are to be led and to follow others. A woman should look on her husband as if he were heaven itself and never weary of thinking how she may yield to him. To do wrong is unbecoming to a wife, and to do good is also unbecoming to a wife. A woman is only to be obedient to what is proper. That one pretty much sums up the whole ideas that they had about women in Neo-Confucianism specifically. They are, in their role, they are to be obedient, they are to produce sons. They don't have any ideas that they can really use because this is what they're for. Okay, so with this idea of women's roles being subservient to men in specific Confucian ways, there's this focus that women are not allowed to remarry after their husband dies, even if they're widowed at like 10 years old. I don't know when they get married.
Yeah, we get married 10.
There you go. Even if that, they can't get married again for the rest of their life. To kind of make this a glorified thing, scholars and people in Confucianism would glorify widows who would remain unmarried for the rest of their life, especially those who were widowed before the age of 30. This showed amazing self-power, and I think it even says in here, says in here, some scholars went as far as to say that it would be better for a widow to die of starvation, because she doesn't have a man to support her, she can't go out and get a job, than to lose her virtue by abandoning her dead husband to marry again. So they had a bit of problems with this, where women would be widowed at a very early age, because as men tend to, there was a high mortality rate. So they had issues with women actually starving to death as they couldn't support themselves, but instead of solving that problem, they tried to make them into martyrs and saying that was a good thing, that they're going to be glorified, and kind of became a bit of a problem. So just some modern views of kind of what the focus of women in kind of more modern views of with Confucianism, because Confucianism is still prevalent in society today. I found this is an interesting fact. It wasn't until 2009 that women officially became recognized as descendants of Confucius. That's not to say that they were not necessarily considered descendants before that time. It was just that that's when it became official. It's interesting that it's taken them that long to kind of get away from the very old Confucian mindset. Women are still considered subordinate to men. There's a lot of cases that I've heard where like women are not allowed to smoke around men. That's something that's in the man's sphere and they can't do it. So like they'll take a break and go to the restrooms and they'll smoke in there because they can't be seen doing that. If you guys, I'm sure some of you have, if any of you have seen like Korean dramas, men tend to like grab their girl's wrist and like drag her out of someplace. That would not fly in America. He'd probably get beaten up. But in Korea, that's actually happened. That's not just a entertainment tactic. That's actually happened, and they follow. So it's kind of interesting. Change is happening, but it's happening really, really slowly and with Western influence. I don't know how much it'll change and women are able to get more into the workplace, and there's less of a focus of them being subordinate. There's still actually a lot of focus on the noble man, but it's kind of changed a little bit in their ideal. It seems like, from what I can tell, the noble man is still highly educated, but he tends to be either a doctor or a lawyer, and that's like the ideal that most of them seek after.